everyone, welcome to Star OMA tutorials. My name is Priya Desai and I'm the Research and Development Manager for Biomedical Informatics here at Research IT at Stanford Medicine. This is part 5 of tutorial 2. So in this video, we're actually going to talk about the structure of the OMA vocabulary. And in the earlier video, we had actually ended on some hands-on exercises for you to find the standard concept IDs for these three source codes. So if you guys actually went ahead and did that, you might have noticed something interesting. The ICD-9 for 27.31 works out fine. It maps to 313217. Which is the standard code for atrial fibrillation. The read codes are used in the UK. It also maps to atrial fibrillation, but this particular ICD-10 code, I48.0, you will find actually doesn't quite map to atrial fibrillation. So a couple of things here for those of you who don't know. ICD-9 and ICD-9-CM are actually two different vocabularies. The ICD-9 vocabulary or ICD-10 vocabulary is what's followed by the WHO, and ICD-9-CM and ICD-10-CM is International Classification of Diseases. Clinical modifications is what the full form is, and it is what is used in the US for mostly diagnosis and also some procedure codes. And it's basically the US's modification to the original ICD-9 and ICD-10 codes. So they actually are two separate vocabularies. In fact, ICD-9-CM and ICD-10-CM more or less contain all of ICD-9 and ICD-10 within them. They are much bigger. ICD-9-CM and ICD-10-CM is a much larger vocabulary than the one followed by the WHO. So actually, let me go back to the notebook. So I'm going to start really where we were, where we ended in the last tutorial. So just going back, this was the exercise we were trying to do. So yes, for the read code, it works out fine. 427.31 is what we gave as an example earlier, so I have not repeated it here. For ICD-10, I48.0, you will see that when you actually, try to get the concept ID in the OMA vocabulary, you'll see that it does not, the concept name that it maps to is not atrial fibrillation, but paroxysmal atrial fibrillation. So what the heck is going on? And as you can see, there are two separate vocabularies, ICD-10-CM and ICD-10. Both of them have a separate mapping, or both of them, since there's two separate vocabularies, they will be mapped. They have two separate rows in the concept table, and but you can see that they, their ICD-10 number, their ICD-10 code, that's the same. Okay, it's I48.0 for both ICD-9-CM and, ICD-10 and ICD-10-CM. So now if you actually try to, so the first thing that is puzzling is, wait, doesn't get mapped to atrial fibrillation like all the others did, but it gets mapped to something a little bit different. So what the heck is going on? And then if you actually find, try to do a maps to relationship in the concept relationship table to see what's the standard concept ID, you find that the standard concept ID that it maps to here is 4154290. So they both map to the same concept ID, which makes sense, right? Because they started out with the same concept code, and though the concept IDs, which is their location or their position in the concept table, is different, they do map to the same. They map to the same standard concept ID, which is good because, right, the relationship is maps to, and this number is the same for both. So it's the standard concept ID. So what standard concept ID is this? So we can actually find that out. Let's go ahead and actually just do that query. So you can pretty much take that. What I'm trying to find out is what is the name of this concept. So I'm gonna go select from, and I want to look in the concept table where concept ID is equal to 415 4290 and okay, so this should work. Okay, so you can see that the concept, the standard concept that it's mapped to with the standard concept ID 415 4290 is indeed a standard concept. It is a SNOMED concept, and it is actually proximal atrial fibrillation. So that part makes sense. So proximal atrial fibrillation gets mapped to proximal atrial fibrillation. So I was looking for atrial fibrillation. So what happened? How, what is proximal atrial fibrillation? Is that completely different than atrial fibrillation? What's going on here? And this is where the disease hierarchy and then the ontology of the SNOMED vocabulary really becomes important and useful. So though it may seem that different coding systems may map to different things in SNOMED, and that would seem to kill, the standard way of, kill the idea of trying to map, things to a standard vocabulary. All is not lost, because SNOMED actually has a hierarchy, and what you will see is that one disease is actually a subset of the other. So these diseases are not completely distinct. These clinical concepts are not independent of each other. They are hierarchical, and the vocabulary system gives you a hierarchy, and this really helps you a lot. And what we're going to talk about a lot in this video is actually about these hierarchical relationships, and that, the power that gives you when you really try to start creating cohorts. So if I go back to my slide deck, quick reminder, remember all the content is in the concept tables. All concepts are in the concept table. The relationships are in the concept relationship table. The multi-step hierarchical relationships are actually put into what's called the concept ancestor table. So just a quick, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. If this is the kind of hierarchical relationship that you're shown, which nodes here are a parent? So take a couple of seconds, pause the video, think about it, and then you can go on. So those of you who answered A, B, and C, that is absolutely correct. B is a parent to D and E, C is a parent to F, A is a parent to B and C, and you can think it's a grandparent to D, E, and F. So who is a child? Take a moment to, just get those answers. So except for A, all the others are children. All of the others are children. And this is the disease hierarchy that I was talking about. So let's actually go to. So as you can see here, all of these proximal atrial fibrillation is a kind of atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation subsumes proximal atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation subsumes rapid atrial fibrillation. So you can think of these as like sort of umbrella concepts, right? That enclose all these other more granular disease definitions. And you can actually find all of this using the concept ancestor table, and that's what we're going to do next. So remember, atrial fibrillation, the standard concept ID for atrial fibrillation is 313217. So let's go to 313217. First, let's find out what are all the relationships that it possibly has with all other concepts. So that's what we're doing here. So here you can see concept ID 1 is always 313217, and 313217 is related to all of these other concept IDs, and the relationship it has is all these others. So for the earlier part, for last time's video, we actually were just looking at maps to relationship or mapped from relationship. Here you see that there are many more relationship types. There is mapped to, mapped from, right? Mapped to and mapped from basically means that they are identical. That's the standard concept. Subsumes basically means that if A subsumes B, then A contains all of B. There is So these are all the different kinds of relationships you have, and these are all the different concepts that atrial fibrillation is related to. So if we actually want to see what these concepts actually are, let's go ahead and run the next cell. So I'm trying to see here so I know concept ID 1 was atrial fibrillation. I want to know what all these other concepts are. And here's the listing of all the other concepts. It's family history of atrial fibrillation excluded, unspecified atrial fibrillation. So, just atrial fibrillation. So this is a different kind of relationship. This subsumes, and this is a. Is a and subsumes are the two really important relationships when you're trying to figure out the hierarchy. Let's go back to the slide deck. And here you can see, so essentially what I've done, this is just a visual representation of what this is. This is showing the relationships, and remember, these are the relationships with atrial fibrillation, and this is the disease hierarchy. So atrial fibrillation is a fibrillation. It is a supraventricular arrhythmia, which is a cardiac arrhythmia, right? So this is the parent of this. Heart disease is the parent of all of them. So these are kind of like almost like umbrella concepts. Atrial fibrillation is a kind of fibrillation. Controlled atrial fibrillation, persistent atrial fibrillation, all of these is a atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation subsumes all of these, and that is what is represented in here. That is exactly what that visual representation. That is a visual. This is a visual representation essentially of this table. So take a second and think about it. Let's explore our ancestors. So let's see, suppose I really wanted to know, I'm going to start at atrial fibrillation. That's going to be like my base. And I want to find all my ancestors, right? So I don't want all the relationships of different, that atrial fibrillation may have with other concepts. I just want to find what are the parents and grandparents, what are the ancestors of atrial fibrillation. So the way to do that is you're actually going to query the concept ancestor table, and what you're going to say is select the maximum level of separation, select and give me the level of separation, and tell me the name of that particular concept where I'm fixing the descendant concept ID. So the descendant concept ID is 313217. So I'm fixing this. This is 313217. I'm saying this is the descendant. Give me all its ancestors. That's what this query is doing. So if we go ahead and do that, this in theory should really give me these. So let's see if it does that. Okay, so you can see that this is the list of, these are the concept IDs and these are the concept names of all the ancestors of atrial fibrillation. The vocabulary ID is, you expect this hierarchy only exists in the standard terminology, so you only expect this vocabulary to be in SNOMED. So we really don't want to pay attention to where the vocabulary ID is cohort, because those two are not really ancestors of atrial fibrillation. Here you can see 313217 is related to 313217 with a maximum separation of 0. Atrial arrhythmia is a parent with a separation of 1. So look at all the SNOMED concepts, because you want to look at only the standard concepts, right? These, this is cohort. We'll talk about that in a different video. You want to make sure that you're only looking at the standard concepts, so where this actually standard concept says S. Supraventricular arrhythmia is a parent, but it's 2 levels removed. Let's go back to this slide deck and see. That's right. Fibrillation and atrial arrhythmia. This should be at level 1. This is at level 2. This is at level 3, and you can go in and check and see that that's exactly what you see here. Cardiac arrhythmia is at level 3. Heart disease is at level 4. Disorder of the cardiovascular system is at level 5. And that's what that is. Okay, so what if I want to find all the descendants of atrial fibrillation? Well, I'm going to do a similar query, but what I'm going to say now is, so I'm still looking in the concept ancestor table. I'm still joining with the concept table. This is just so that I get the names, but I'm going to say that the ancestor concept ID is 313217. So I'm fixing the ancestor concept ID and I'm saying, give me all the descendants. Give me all the descendants for this ancestor. In the earlier query, we said, give me all the ancestors of this descendant, right? So we just flipped it. So let's go ahead and run that. And we should be able to get, all of these. Okay, so here you see, these are the atrial fibrillation is a map to atrial fibrillation, level separation 0, but then here are the others, which is, and all separated by, one level of separation. Permanent atrial fibrillation, persistent atrial fibrillation, proximal atrial fibrillation, etc. And this is exactly what you will see here. Okay, so now suppose we wanted to find upper gastrointestinal bleeding. So let's just look, we don't know what the concept ID is. We don't know what its concept code is in any particular vocabulary. So let's just search with the name. Okay, so the name, okay, so there is a concept name, upper gastrointestinal bleeding. It's a standard concept. It's a concept in SNOMED. That's the concept ID. If I want to I want to find the standard concept ID, because remember, this is the SNOMED standard concept ID. I want to see what else is it related to. I can see upper gastrointestinal bleeding, maps to, and subsumes is a maps to subsume. So remember, maps to is the maps to or mapped from always is to the standard concept. So this is probably the standard concept. Subsumes basically means it's a parent of, and is a means it's a descendant of, right? Okay, this is just another query that actually came up. I think we put it in here because somebody during the tutorials asked us, this for this particular concept ID, standard concept ID, which has got to do with gestational diabetes. What all is it related to? So let's go ahead and just run this query. This is so here you can see the concept is abnormal glucose tolerance test during pregnancy, and then these are all the other concepts that it's related to. Pregnancy with abnormal glucose tolerance test, abnormal glucose tolerance test during whatever. So these are different, slightly different conditions, but similar enough, and it's related. And this sort of probably, let's see, the ancestor is this, and get us the descendants, right? So this particular condition subsumes all of these conditions, right? Because it's the ancestor. So next, let's go back here. Oh, okay. So I think in the slide deck, what we actually did with in the notebook, we kind of just go through that with the slide deck. It just may help your understanding a little bit. So what we're doing here is saying, okay, for atrial fibrillation, what are all the other concepts it's related to? So here are all the concepts it's related to, because concept ID 1 is atrial fibrillation, and then these are all the relationships it has, the kinds of relationships it can have. These are the related concepts. Subsumes typically are the descendant concepts, right? A subsumes B. So A is the parent of B, and is an ancestor concept. So if atrial fibrillation is a fibrillation, right? So fibrillation subsumes atrial fibrillation. Atrial fibrillation is a fibrillation. Mapped from and mapped to, these are basically when you're mapping to standard concepts, right? So they're kind of, you can think of them as equivalent. All right, so this is just a quick question. So take a couple of seconds before an answer. So C is a. So remember, what is a? So is a descendant, and C is just a descendant of A. So C is a descendant of only A. Okay, we kind of went through this. Which node has 2 levels of separation with D? And the answer to that is just A. So remember, E does not have 2 levels of separation with D. So E is not a correct answer. It's just going to be A, because it needs to be directly related. So it's either is a or subsumes. That's the only way we're going to count the nodes. Okay, and this is just basically a visual representation of everything we've talked about, right? This is a descendant of this, which is the ancestor. These are the different kinds of relationships. This and this are separated by 2 levels of separation. All of these here are concepts. Subsumes, is a, mapped to, mapped from, these are all concept relationships. This diseases of the cardiovascular system and atrial fibrillation are separated by 5 levels of separation. The way we actually explored the concepts, the ancestor or descendants, is if you want to find the ancestors, hold the descendant and say, give me all the ancestors. If you want to find the descendants, you say, hold the ancestor, give me all the descendants. Which nodes will be on the list of descendant concept ID for B? So take a minute to think. So descendant concept ID for B will be both E and D. A couple of hands-on exercises. Go ahead and find what the standard concepts for these concept names are. We did gastrointestinal bleeding. We did another one. We did the gestational diabetes one. but go ahead and see if you can find what the standard concept for plague is, for asthma is, ingrown toenail, and your favorite concept. So far we've really just shown you how you can find it using the concept and the concept relationship tables in the OMOP common data model, but turns out that there is a really lovely GUI representation of the concept table, the concept relationship table, and the concept ancestor table. There is a GUI for all of this, and it's called Athena, and the next video is actually going to walk you through, it'll give you like a short tutorial on Athena. So see you guys next time. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by the Board of Trustees of the Leland Stanford Junior University. Please visit us at med.stanford.edu.